Well, what does it mean to speak in tongues according to Acts chapter 2? Now, this, of course, is not the tongues that Paul talks about in the letter to the Corinthians. That tongues passage, perhaps, I think is best for another video. But that being said, let's find out what this tongues business is all about when you read Acts chapter 2. So let's look at chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. When the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. Now there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. When they heard this sound, a crowd came together in bewilderment because each one heard their own language being spoken. Utterly amazed, they asked, "Aren't all these who are speaking Galileans? Well, then how is it that each of us hears them in our own native languages? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and the parts of Libya near Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism, Cretans and Arabs, we hear them declaring the wonders of God in our own tongues." Well, the day of Pentecost commemorated the first fruits of the wheat harvest. But really, by Jesus' time, it carried another great significance to it. It was the time in which they commemorated the giving of the 10 Commandments. So this means that thousands of Jews would come to Jerusalem during this time period. And the passage tells us that the 120 followers of Jesus that you read about in Acts chapter 1, that they were all gathered together in a house. And I'm not really sure that there's any other passage in the Bible that is quite like this. The passage is so interesting. It says that there was a noise like a violent wind that came and it filled the house. There was not an actual wind. There was only a sound like a violent wind. And we're told that they saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. I mean, just a bizarre event, just a bizarre passage. And it wasn't literal tongues of fire, but really that was the best way that they were able to describe it. And evidently the 120, they begin somehow to drift out of the house, and they begin to mingle with the crowd that is there, that is packed into Jerusalem for the feast. And because of the amount of people from around the empire, the mother tongues at this time, all these people that were gathered would have been highly diverse. And in the midst of these vast crowds, the Holy Spirit does a miracle. Look again with me at verse 4. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. Just think about that. So what we see here at Pentecost is the Holy Spirit bringing unity. So all of these different nationalities, they come together in one place. And the miracle that we see is that all of these crowds that are gathered, all of this diverse people, they began to speak in other tongues. So that is, they began to speak in other languages. So notice what God does not do. God does not do a miracle in which he creates one language to communicate in. Neither does God make it so that everyone hears each other in one language. No, he makes it to where they all hear each other in their own languages. It's a miracle. And understand that this was not merely a miracle of hearing, but it was a miracle of speech. They began to speak in other languages as the Spirit enabled them. So God does a miracle in which he keeps the diversity of the people, but makes them all hear one another in their own languages. I mean, the world here of Pentecost, if you think about it, is the world in which we would love to be in, isn't it? Where all peoples are communicating and fellowshipping, but yet their diversity is still kept. This passage is a reminder to us that all such attempts to link the gospel to one language really is an offense to the Spirit's working. It really is. You see, the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost makes it abundantly clear that every language, every single language, is an appropriate vehicle for the praise of Jesus Christ. The Holy Spirit is a translator. The Holy Spirit speaks into every human culture. He doesn't just create one culture, He bridges all cultures. I mean, just think about it. There's a Chinese Christianity, a Korean Christianity, an Indonesian Christianity, a Malaysian Christianity, an African Christianity, a South American Christianity, a North American Christianity. You see, the point of this tongues phenomenon was to teach us that Christ is not the possession of any one culture. And we have missed this, I'm afraid. You see, the goal of the Church of Jesus Christ must be integration, never segregation. But sadly, segregation seems to be winning out, at least in the church of the Western world. Well, let's slide on into home plate, shall we? Acts chapter 2 is a picture of a unified and diverse church. So the tongues here is not really some strange babble. Tongues in this context means languages. So God does a miracle in which He keeps the diversity of the people, but makes them all hear one another in their own languages. Well, thank you so much for listening in. If you have been helped by this video, please go ahead and hit the like button, because that will push this video out to more and more people that can truly be helped by it. And if you are interested in hearing more about the tongues that Paul wrote about in the Corinthians and the letter to the Corinthians, then go ahead and comment down below, and I'll see if I can do my best to prioritize teaching about that very soon. Well, thank you so much, and God bless you in the way.